I came back for the annual charity gala after a month overseas, still half jet-lagged, and slid into my seat just as the lights dimmed. My sister leaned toward me, perfume sharp in the air, and whispered, "They cut your donation." It wasn't a question, not even sympathy, just a fact dropped between us like a pebble into a well. I turned my head slightly, met her eyes for a fraction of a second. Then I stood, smoothed my dress, and stepped out of the row. No one reached for me. No one asked where I was going. The applause for the opening speech swallowed my footsteps as I walked toward the exit. The ballroom smelled of champagne and roses, the kind they arranged to look effortlessly elegant but cost more than a week's rent. As I crossed the marble lobby, I could still hear the MC's voice naming the gold-tier benefactors, each one basking under the chandelier's light. My name was not among them. 5 years of funding, of quietly wiring more than anyone else in that room, and my place in the hierarchy vanished with the flick of a pen. The valet asked if I needed my car. I shook my head. I wasn't ready to drive. I just stepped outside, letting the December air sting my skin until the hum of conversation inside became a muffled drone. I thought about how this had started. The Carter Family Foundation was born at a dinner table in my parents' kitchen, all white linen and overcooked salmon. My father talked about legacy, my mother about giving back. But the truth? The seed money came from me $75,000 from the bonus I'd earned that year, plus another $25,000 scraped from savings I'd pretended I didn't have. They'd promised it was a joint effort, but over the years, the joint part faded. My contributions became the backbone, the silent current that kept their public image afloat. It wasn't charity for me, it was habit. The same habit that had me cancel a vacation to Tuscany so we could sponsor the underprivileged youth arts program when the Gala fund fell short. The same habit that had me skip a home renovation so we could make the final pledge for the Children's Hospital wing, my name nowhere near the plaque, and I never questioned it, not until tonight. The pattern was always the same. My parents would beam under camera flashes. My brother, the visionary they called him, would charm donors, and I would be the quiet constant, the one who made the math work when pledges didn't meet the mark. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit, but it did matter, more than I admitted, when I saw the printed program tonight and my name had been erased completely. My phone buzzed once. A text from my sister. "Just so you know, it wasn't my idea." I didn't reply. I could see her in my mind's eye, back at the table, sipping her wine like she wasn't part of it, like she hadn't known for weeks. I turned down the side street, the echo of my heels on the sidewalk, a steady metronome. My apartment was only 10 minutes away, but I walked slower than usual, each step pressing the realization deeper. This wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. My family had decided I no longer needed a seat at their table financially, publicly, symbolically. I thought about the last check I'd written. $40,000 in November, earmarked for the Foundation's Community Outreach Initiative. I'd wired it through the same joint account we'd always used. Now I wondered if that money had even gone where it was supposed to. The cold crept under my coat, but I didn't hurry. I let the sting keep me awake, focused. A memory flickered 3 years ago. After a gala much like this one, my father had leaned close during dessert and murmured, "You're the reason this works, Claire." Don't ever doubt that. I'd believed him. Now the echo of those words felt like a joke. At the corner, I stopped at a coffee cart still open under a string of flickering lights. The vendor handed me a paper cup, steam curling into the dark. I held it, not drinking, feeling the heat seep into my fingers, while the rest of me stayed cold. Somewhere behind me, the gala's music spilled faintly into the night. I didn't look back. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The balance on the Foundation's joint account stared back at me. I knew the numbers by heart. I also knew how quickly they could disappear when you trusted the wrong people. I took a slow breath, then locked the screen. Not here, not yet. The marble lobby, the applause, my sister's whisper, it was all still too loud in my head. Tonight, I would let the cold walk me home. Tomorrow, I would start asking questions. But even now, I already knew one thing. The answers were going to hurt, and not in a way that could be fixed with flowers or apologies. And when they came, I wouldn't be stepping aside. I'd be stepping away. For good. 5 blocks from the gala, I cut down an empty street lined with brownstones, the kind I used to imagine living in when I was younger, before I knew how many zeros it took to make that happen. The wind had a bite to it, the kind that worked its way through seams and buttons, but I let it keep me moving. It felt cleaner than the warmth inside that ballroom. My mind wandered back not to the last gala, but to the beginning, to the first time my parents realized I could be useful in ways that didn't involve a seat at their table. I was 27, fresh into a finance job that paid more than I knew how to spend. I still believed that success meant family security, that if you did well, you shared it. My father had been between contracts, my mother hinting about temporary cash flow issues, and my brother had just launched one of his grand ventures that looked glossy but bled money. They called a family meeting over Sunday lunch. My mother made roast chicken, my father poured wine, and then they asked if I could help bridge a gap, just this once. It was for the house repairs, they said, and a donation they'd promised to the children's shelter. I wrote the check without hesitation. It felt good, even noble, to be the one who could keep things steady. That just once turned into a pattern so quickly I barely noticed. Within a year, I was quietly covering the mortgage during a slow season for my dad's contracting work. 6 months later, I funded my brother's shortfall for his cafe twice. Somewhere in there, the foundation was born. It was my mother's idea, a way to make our giving official. I didn't argue when they named it after the family. The first gala was small, maybe 40 people in a hotel banquet room, but I remember feeling proud. I believed in it. I believed in them. Every year after, my contributions grew. Not just money time, contacts, strategy. I drafted grant proposals after work, met with potential sponsors on my lunch breaks, and when pledges didn't come through, I filled the gap myself so programs wouldn't be cut. No one saw that part. The public face of the foundation was always my parents and my brother, smiling in photos, accepting plaques. My name lived in the financial statements, not the press releases. And that was fine until I realized they'd come to expect it. It stopped being gratitude and started being an unspoken obligation. They never said, "We can't do this without you anymore." They just assumed I'd cover it. The sacrifices piled up quietly. I turned down a promotion that would have moved me to another city because I didn't want to risk being too far from the family's urgent needs. I passed on buying my own place because my savings kept getting funneled into emergency. Shortfalls for the foundation. My vacations were weekend road trips, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I couldn't justify spending on myself when the gala fund was running low. Even when I started dating someone seriously, I found myself budgeting, not for us, but for whatever upcoming project the family had promised to fund. And for years, I told myself this was my choice, that I was investing in something meaningful. But there were cracks, moments I ignored. Like 2 years ago, when I found out my brother had used part of a designated donation to upgrade his office furniture, leather chairs, a glass desk, a sound system, my father brushed it off, said it was important for client impressions. Or last spring, when my mother signed a contract for a renovation project under the foundation's name without securing funding first, then called me in tears until I agreed to loan the balance. They always made it sound like a temporary crisis, always promised to pay me back, but the repayment never came. It wasn't malice, I told myself. Just poor management. They were visionaries, not numbers people. I was the numbers person. That was my role. Tonight, though, walking away from the gala, I couldn't pretend anymore. Erasing my name from the benefactor list wasn't a mistake. It was a statement, a decision. And decisions like that didn't happen in a vacuum. They were discussed, agreed upon, executed. My sister's whisper had been the closest thing to warning I was going to get. As I turned onto my street, I thought about the last wire I'd sent $40,000 from my personal account to the foundation's joint fund. I'd marked it for Community Outreach Initiative, the program I'd fought to keep alive when the board wanted to cut it. Now, I had to wonder if that money had even reached the program, or if it had been quietly rerouted like so many other temporary reallocations. The key turned heavy in my apartment door. Inside, the air was still, the kind of stillness that feels fragile, like one phone call could shatter it. I set my coat on the back of a chair, kicked off my heels, and sat at my desk without turning on the main light. The glow from my laptop screen was enough. I logged into the joint account. The numbers looked wrong, not small enough to mean they'd spent it all, but different. Funds moved into sub-accounts I didn't recognize. Transfers labeled with vague phrases. Project consolidation. Operating liquidity. I clicked through until I found one from last week, a large transfer to an entity I'd never heard of. My pulse slowed, not sped up. This wasn't surprise. This was confirmation. Somewhere deep down, I'd been expecting to find something like this for a long time. I closed the laptop without bookmarking anything. I wasn't ready to pull that thread tonight. The evidence would still be there in the morning. For now, I sat back in my chair, listening to the faint city hum beyond my window. My sister's words replayed in my head, but not the way she'd said them, not like a warning. More like an announcement. They cut your donation, as if it had been theirs to cut. I knew then that whatever was coming next wasn't going to be about recovering my place in their world. It was going to be about reclaiming what had always been mine, and deciding just how much of the truth I was willing to drag into the light. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Unknown number, I let it ring out. It came again and again. On the third time I answered, voice flat. "This is Claire." A man introduced himself as a loan officer from a regional bank I'd never used. He said they were finalizing paperwork for a $2 million line of credit for the Carter Family Foundation and just needed to confirm my identity as a cosigner. My stomach went still, the way it does right before a car crash. "I didn't apply for a loan," I said. There was a pause on his end, papers shuffling. "Well, we have your signature here, and your social security number. The documents were submitted by your father, your mother, and an affiliate entity called Weston Consulting, LLC. Weston Consulting. I knew that name. It was my brother's shell company, the one he'd set up 3 years ago to handle administrative overflow for the foundation. I'd always suspected it was more of a tax play than anything real. The officer said the loan was meant to secure assets in perpetuity, which was a dressed-up way of saying they wanted to buy the foundation outright and turn it into a private holding. And they'd done it with my name on the dotted line. I asked him to email me the packet. He hesitated, then agreed. By the time I opened the PDF an hour later, I was no longer surprised by what I saw. My name typed neatly under Authorized Co-Signer. My signature replicated in digital ink. The notary stamp was real, but the date was from a day I'd been out of the country. It was a forgery so clean it would have sailed through if that bank hadn't been meticulous. And now, I understood exactly why my name had been erased from the Gala program. They weren't pushing me aside. They were trying to cut me out quietly, leave my name on the legal liabilities while taking the assets for themselves. My first instinct was to call my sister, the only one who'd given me even a hint. But I stopped. She'd whispered the truth in the ballroom, yes, but not the whole truth. If she'd known about this loan and said nothing, she wasn't an ally. She was a bystander. I forwarded the packet to my personal email, then to a secure folder I'd set up years ago when I first started noticing accounting quirks in the foundation's books. That folder had statements, receipts, screenshots, all organized by year. Quiet insurance. I opened the oldest one, from the year after the foundation launched, and scrolled through until I found a transfer that looked eerily similar to what I'd seen last night. Money moved from our joint account into Weston Consulting for project consolidation. Only back then, I'd let my brother wave it off as temporary. I closed the file and sat still for a long time, the hum of my refrigerator loud in the quiet. It was one thing to suspect mismanagement. It was another to see a coordinated effort to strip me of my role, take the money, and leave me holding the bag for a multi-million-dollar debt I never agreed to. Around noon, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through, thin and rehearsed. "Claire, honey, we heard from the bank. There's been a misunderstanding. Call me back so we can straighten it out before things get complicated." Before things get complicated, as if they weren't already. I thought about calling her bluff, telling her I had the documents, but I wanted to see how far they'd go without knowing I knew. An hour later, my father texted, "Need to talk. Don't make this bigger than it is." Bigger than it is. I almost laughed. They'd tried to forge my name onto a $2 million loan and thought this was still small enough to contain. I didn't answer him either. Instead, I called a different number, a corporate attorney I'd worked with on a client deal 2 years back. We weren't friends, but he respected my thoroughness. I explained the situation, sent over the documents, and waited while he read. When he came back on the line, his voice was different. "Claire, this isn't sloppy. Whoever did this knows the system. And if the bank hadn't flagged the date mismatch, this would already be approved. Your liability here is significant. I asked what my options were. He outlined them in calm, methodical terms: file an affidavit of forgery with the bank, notify the police, and initiate a civil suit for fraud against every signatory. I could also petition for an injunction to freeze any accounts tied to the foundation until the matter was resolved. The words landed like stones, heavy but solid. This was no longer about saving face or preserving family harmony. This was about protecting myself from people who had made it clear I was just a means to an end. That night, I sat at my desk again, the same spot where I'd stared at those vague transfer labels less than 24 hours ago. Only now, I had proof that the story was darker than I'd let myself believe. My parents' voices, my brother's charm, the polished image of the Carter Family Foundation, all of it was a front. Behind it was a willingness to cross lines I'd never imagined they'd approach. I thought about the years I'd spent keeping the foundation alive late nights, sacrificed plans, my own money funneled quietly into projects so they wouldn't collapse. I thought about the pride I used to feel when people called us generous. And I thought about the moment in that ballroom when my sister leaned in and whispered, "They cut your donation," like it was nothing more than a seating change. But I knew better now. They hadn't just cut me out. They'd tried to make sure I'd never be able to get back in except to take the fall when their plans burned down. And as I closed the folder, one thought settled in for good. I wasn't going to be the one left holding their debt, not this time. The next morning, I didn't bother waiting for another call from them. I'd already decided what needed to be done. By 8 a.m., I was at my attorney's office, a manila folder under my arm. Inside was everything: bank statements, forged loan documents, old transfers to Weston Consulting, emails with vague promises about temporary reallocations. He didn't waste time. We drafted the affidavit of forgery, notarized it on the spot, and sent it to the bank's fraud department. Next came the formal notice of account freeze, a petition to lock every fund tied to the Carter Family Foundation until the investigation was complete. Once the paperwork was filed, I walked out into the crisp morning with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The foundation wasn't my responsibility anymore, but the money still was my money. And I wasn't going to let them move another cent without a fight. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop, logged into the joint account for what I knew would be the last time, and initiated a full withdrawal of my personal contributions. The number blinked on the screen: 7 figures. Years of deposits, countless sacrifices, all reduced to a clean balance I now pulled into an account with only my name on it. I canceled every recurring transfer, every automatic payment I'd set up for the foundation. The next step was symbolic, but necessary. I emailed the foundation's board, a group of people who'd known me for years, but had never seen me as anything other than the quiet donor in the background, and told them I was resigning from all roles effective immediately. No explanation, just a clean final line. My phone lit up almost instantly. First it was my mother, then my father, then my brother. When I didn't answer, the text started, "Claire, this is insane. We can fix this. Call us. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're hurting the whole family." I stared at the messages until they blurred, then put my phone face down on the desk. I wasn't interested in their spin, not anymore. Around noon, there was a sharp knock at my door. I opened it to find my father standing there, coat half-zipped, his jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said. "Not here," I replied, stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind me. "You forged my name, Dad." His mouth opened, closed. "It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's simple. You took my identity, attached it to a $2 million loan, and planned to keep me out of the room until it was too late to stop it." He shook his head, lowering his voice like we were in a courtroom. "It was for the foundation, for the family. You needed me to be the safety net again, only this time you wanted it without my consent." His eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake." I almost laughed. "The mistake was thinking you wouldn't cross this line." I turned to leave, but he caught my arm. "You'll regret this when the truth comes out." I looked at him then, really looked. The truth already has. I walked back inside without another word, locked the door, and leaned against it until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. The rest of the day was a blur of logistics. I called the police fraud division, filed the initial report, and sent over the documentation. I forwarded the same packet to the IRS tip line, knowing the tax implications of a forged loan tied to a nonprofit would make the investigation inevitable. My attorney advised me to prepare for blowback smear campaigns, legal threats, the works. I told him I was ready. But the truth was, I'd already lived through years of their quiet manipulation. Whatever came next couldn't touch the relief of finally stepping out of it. That night, my sister texted, "You've set off a bomb. They're furious." I typed back, "Good. Maybe now they'll stop pretending I'm part of this family while they plan my downfall." I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted the thread entirely. The less I engaged, the stronger I felt. Before bed, I poured a glass of water, sat at my kitchen table, and let the stillness settle in. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. The calls would come again, the accusations, the attempts to twist the story until I was the villain. But the line was drawn now, in ink and law. And for the first time in years, I knew I wouldn't be stepping back over it. The confrontation came a week later, dressed up as a family meeting. My cousin Emily was the one who set it up, texting me that it was just to clear the air. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to see their faces when I said certain things out loud. The meeting was held in the Foundation's conference room, a place I knew better than my own living room. When I walked in, they were already seated like a jury, my father at the head of the table, my mother beside him, my brother leaning back with that smirk he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. Emily sat near the corner, clearly regretting volunteering as the neutral party. My father opened first, trying for civility. "Claire, we just want to understand why you're doing this." I sat down, folded my hands, and looked at each of them in turn. "You forged my name on a $2 million loan. That's not a misunderstanding, that's fraud." My mother jumped in. "We didn't forge anything. It was a clerical error. The bank—" I cut her off. "The bank called me. I have the documents. I have the timestamps. I was in another country on the day your notary stamp says I was here signing. Do you really want me to pull up the flight records?" She looked away. My brother leaned forward. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We were trying to secure funding to keep everything going. For the community, for the causes you care about." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You were trying to secure funding while making me the guarantor. If it went bad, the bank would have come for me first. You get the assets, I get the liability. That's not family. That's exploitation." My father's jaw tightened. "We trusted you to be part of this." "You used me," I corrected. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, laying it flat on the table. "Every dollar I've contributed to this foundation, every emergency payment I made when pledges fell through, every transfer to Weston Consulting that you labeled as temporary." I slid the folder toward them. My brother glanced at it like it was a pile of trash. "What's your point?" "My point," I said, leaning back, "is that I have proof of exactly how much of this foundation was funded by me and how much of that money was redirected to cover your debts, your renovations, your vacations." Emily's eyes widened, flicking between us. My father didn't touch the folder. "You're making it sound like we're criminals," he said. "If the shoe fits," I replied. My mother's voice rose, brittle. "After everything we've done for you—" "Stop," I said sharply. "Stop pretending that this is about gratitude. This is about control. You wanted the money without the accountability. And when you realized you couldn't have both, you cut me out of the gala, erased my name from the donor list, and set me up for a loan I never agreed to." My brother scoffed. "You're acting like you're the only one who's sacrificed for this family." "No," I said, "I'm acting like the only one who's done it without expecting applause." Silence settled over the table, thick and suffocating. I could feel Emily holding her breath. I stood, gathering my bag. "This meeting is over. If you contact me about foundation business again, I'll forward it directly to my attorney." My father's voice followed me as I reached the door. "You'll regret this, Claire." I didn't turn around. I already regret staying this long. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of their reflections in the glass. 3 people who looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. Not because they'd suddenly become less, but because I'd finally stopped looking at them through the lens of obligation. I walked out into the cold evening air, breathing deep. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. Just relief. And underneath it, something steadier. Resolve. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It was more like watching a slow leak in a dam, first a trickle, then a steady stream, and then everything giving way at once. A week after the family meeting, I got a call from a former board member, someone who'd always been polite but distant. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "They lost the matching grant from the Langford Foundation," he said. Pulled it after hearing about the fraud investigation. That one grant had accounted for nearly a quarter of the foundation's annual budget. Without it, I knew they'd be scrambling. 2 days later, an email popped up from a contact at the city's Department of Housing and Community Development. They'd suspended all partnerships with the Carter Family Foundation pending review of its financial practices. The phrasing was diplomatic, but the meaning was clear they didn't want to be anywhere near the mess. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My attorney had already warned me. This would happen once the bank forwarded the forgery report to regulatory agencies. The real unraveling came the following week. A local paper ran a front-page piece. Carter Family Foundation under investigation for financial misconduct. The photo they used was from last year's gala, my parents and my brother standing under a banner with the foundation's name in gold script. My absence in the photo made the headline sting even more for them, I'm sure. That morning, my phone lit up with texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some wanted details, others offered polite, awkward sympathy. I ignored them all. I wasn't interested in managing anyone's perception. That was their game, not mine. Then came the desperate attempts to plug the holes. My brother sent a long, rambling email about restructuring opportunities, and how, if I returned even temporarily, we could present a united front to donors. My mother left a voicemail in tears, saying staff members were going without paychecks and that some had threatened to sue. My father, ever the strategist, tried a different approach, reminding me about family legacy and warning that if the foundation went under, it's not just our name that takes the hit. I didn't call any of them back. I didn't need to be in the room to know what it looked like, their polished image crumbling, the phone calls from donors going unanswered, the polite distance of people who once fawned over them at events. Even the press releases they sent out had a different tone now, less confident, more pleading. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard that my brother had tried to secure a private loan to cover immediate expenses, but was turned down after the lender did a background check and saw the pending investigation. My parents had apparently put part of their property portfolio up for sale, but buyers were circling like vultures, offering insultingly low bids. And then, the part that surprised me, the donors started talking. Quietly at first, then more openly. At a networking event I attended for an entirely different cause, I overheard two people discussing how the Carters never really funded things themselves, and how most of their big donations came from one source they never acknowledged. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The truth was beginning to seep out in ways no press statement could contain. A month into the collapse, I got a message from a former program director I'd always liked. She wrote that she'd resigned, not because she believed all the rumors, but because she was tired of the chaos and tired of being asked to do her job without the resources to do it well. She ended with, "I always knew it was you who kept this place running." I sat with that one for a while before replying with a simple thank you. It wasn't vindication exactly, but it was something close. Meanwhile, my attorney kept me updated on the legal side. The forgery case was moving forward. The bank had confirmed my affidavit and had enough evidence to remove me from any liability. The rest of the investigation into the foundation's broader financial practices was still ongoing, but it was clear my family would not come out of it unscathed. Their accounts were frozen, their donor relationships shattered, and their reputation so carefully curated over decades was in tatters. From the outside, it might have looked like I'd won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like watching a house burn that you'd already moved out of, knowing there was nothing left in it for you. And yet, as each week passed without a single request for me to fix something, without another middle-of-the-night call demanding money, the air in my apartment felt a little lighter. I could breathe without waiting for the next crisis. Without them, I realized my life wasn't empty. It was finally mine. 2 months after the article broke, the official notice came in the mail. The Carter Family Foundation had lost its nonprofit status pending the outcome of the investigation. In practical terms, it meant they could no longer solicit tax-deductible donations, but symbolically, it was the final blow. Whatever prestige the foundation had clung to was gone. I set the envelope on my kitchen counter, untouched. It wasn't my problem to fix. That same week, I signed the incorporation papers for a new charitable fund. Small, targeted, transparent. No grand galas or glossy photo ops. Just direct aid to the programs I believed in. I named it after no one, least of all myself. The first donation I made was to the Community Outreach Initiative, the same program I'd fought to keep alive before the board tried to cut it. The director called me personally, her voice cracking with relief. "We thought we were going to have to shut down next month," she said. I told her not to worry about next month, or the one after that. The money was hers, no strings attached. I didn't attend any ribbon cuttings or send out press releases. I didn't need to. A few days later, an ivory envelope appeared in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. An invitation to the Carter family gala. I almost laughed. Maybe they thought enough time had passed. Maybe they hoped I'd return to my role as the silent benefactor. I carried it to the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat for a moment looking at the familiar swirl of their logo. For years, I'd associated it with obligation, with the quiet expectation that I'd keep things running no matter the cost to myself. Now, it was just paper. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside my desk, the one where I kept spare keys and old postcards. I didn't tear it up. I didn't send a reply. It would sit there, unanswered, like so many things between us. Not because I was waiting to decide, but because I already had. A week later, I ran into my sister at a grocery store. She looked tired, older somehow, her cart half full of basics. We exchanged polite greetings, nothing more. As I was about to leave, she hesitated. "They're not doing well," she said quietly. I nodded. "I know." She searched my face, maybe for sympathy, maybe for some sign that I'd relent. "It's strange," she went on. "They keep talking about the old days, about when everything worked, but they never say your name." "They don't need to," I said. She studied me for a moment, then gave the smallest nod, as if she finally understood. We parted without promises to call. That night, I walked along the river, the city lights trembling in the water. For years, I'd carried the weight of being the one who held everything together, the one who filled in the gaps, who smoothed over the cracks so no one else would see. Letting go hadn't been a single moment, it had been a series of quiet decisions, each one pulling me further from the person they expected me to be. I thought about the girl I'd been at the first gala, so proud to be part of something that bore the family name. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up balancing their books, all the vacations I'd postponed, all the dinners I'd left early to take a call about some new emergency. And I thought about how none of it had been enough to earn honesty or loyalty or even basic respect. That part used to hurt the most. Now, it didn't. They could rewrite the story however they wanted. They could tell themselves I'd abandoned them, that I'd turned my back on the family. The truth was simpler. I'd stopped letting them use me as a resource they could drain without consequence. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from the new fund. Another small donation processed. Another program fully funded for the month. It wasn't the scale of the foundation, but it was clean. It was mine. I stood for a while watching the river, until the cold began to settle into my bones. As I turned to head home, I realized I hadn't thought about what they might be saying about me in weeks. That silence was its own kind of freedom. People think leaving is a grand gesture, a slammed door or a shouted declaration. For me, it was quieter. It was choosing not to show up, not to answer, not to fix what they'd broken. It was drinking my tea while their invitation sat unopened in a drawer. It was knowing they might never understand and being fine with that. I didn't walk away to punish them. I walked away to give myself back the life I'd been giving away piece by piece. And standing there in the dark, with the city humming behind me, I knew I wouldn't go back, not for an apology, not for redemption, not for anything.